Welcome to the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, episode 10. I'm very proud to mark this milestone with a truly fascinating conversation with a very talented guest, Mara Katria. In this episode, Mara takes us on a journey through her childhood and shares the moments that shaped her into the talented creator she is today. We explore why it's important to keep the door open to both imagination and the magical, how she transitioned into filmmaking and music, and her experiences with both the paranormal and the metaphysical. Mara also delves into her creative process, offering a detailed outline of the way she tackles artistic challenges and brings her vision to life. And, of course, we also discuss her upcoming album, Modern M, which she collaborated on with the iconic English new wave post-punk band Modern English. Before we dive into this episode, there are a few things I would like to mention. First of all, I feel incredibly blessed to have had the opportunity to speak with so many amazing people. Before starting this podcast, I didn't expect it to get the attention that it did, and I'm truly honored by the wonderful guests who came on to share their stories. It's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And to everyone who has joined me, and to all the listeners, thank you. I also want to note that I always edit episodes as part of the post-production process. I never change the tone of the conversation, but I do smooth out long silences and sounds like to create a more fluid, natural dialogue with a good pace. For this conversation with Mara, I decided to leave it untouched. Not a single cut has been made, and the only adjustments were to remove background noises from my side, like me bumping into a microphone and a fire truck passing by. To quote Mara from our conversation, "I'm going to put my hands on the keyboard. I'm going to put my hands on the guitar. And if I make a weird note or have a frog in my throat, I'm leaving that in, because my humanity is what I can offer." And this conversation is just that, human and real. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the Jeffrey van Leeuwen podcast, please consider subscribing or following the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Leaving a comment or a positive review is also a great way to help out. All resources mentioned in this episode can be found in the description below. And with all of that out of the way, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mara Katria. Hi Mara, very good day to you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing excellent, Jeffrey, because I'm here. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. I've been looking forward to this interview for what feels now like years. Even though we met like 6-7 weeks ago, it feels way longer than that. So I'm really excited for this conversation.
Ditto, my friend.
I bet you're pretty busy right now with the album.
Oh my gosh, yes, I am. I'm very, very busy, but in a wonderful way. Every waking minute is spent on either things that are involved directly with the album as far as planning release and getting my head around a small tour, or just having thoughts that are associated with the concepts that are on the album as far as other music or watching TV. It all just relates back. So it's in the flow now.
That sounds really, really good. We'll definitely delve into that because I'm really curious about the album and what influences went in it, what we can expect from the final product, what your ideas behind them are. So we'll definitely step into that. I think if it's okay with you, I think it'll be very fascinating to start at the beginning of your story. So wherever you feel it makes the most sense, and I believe this will help paint a good picture of how you've evolved into the creative powerhouse that you are today. How does that sound?
Well, you do me honor by saying it that way. I really appreciate it. And before I start, I just want to say I have listened to every single episode that you've put out, and I I really want to raise you up and tell you it's beautiful how you listen and attend to the people. It's an act of giving and acknowledging how valuable each of their stories is. It has moved me from week to week, and traditionally Tuesday is definitely my least favorite day of the week. Not anymore. Not anymore. So thank you for being you and doing what you are doing.
I'm very glad to hear that. That actually means the world. Thank you very much for saying that, Mara. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I mean it. As far as my timeline, I'll skip around a little bit, but what you say makes me go back to the beginning. And one quick story I can say is that I was born in Death Valley, California, down in the desert area, and I don't remember a ton from that, but you asked a question recently about what is your earliest childhood memory, and one of my earliest memories was being on this back concrete surface, and my feet are hot. I know my feet are very small, and I'm standing in the sun, and I'm looking across a fence, and I can see in between the fence posts glittering water from an above ground pool, and it's sort of making that caustic lighting effect. And I remember that moment vividly. And it is strange to think, because I didn't spend much time in California. My dad ended up being a chess champion who was hired in New York. And so my mother, who was running a hospice in California, and she did a beautiful job. Her name is Marina Petman. Love her so much. And my dad is Stephen. And she was running the hospice. She's just an incredible giver. And I just am inspired by her every single day. She uprooted her life for my dad's dream to pursue being a part of the Chess Federation. And so when I was about 2.5 years old, we uprooted. My sister was, I think, about 5 years old. We uprooted from California and we went all the way across to New York. And my first memories in New York are my little feet. And I remember my nightgown, and I think I had Care Bears on it. And I looked up into the sky and I was just incredibly overtaken by the magic of snow and these white flakes just coming down, and thinking, this is where I belong. As much as California is beautiful with the shining water and the hot sun, that cold, that white, that brilliant snow coming down let me know I was home. And I was in the Hudson Valley of New York, so it's about an hour north of Manhattan. And I'm so grateful we moved there. It wasn't smooth sailing. The Chess Federation job worked out for a while, and my dad's a brilliant man, but the job fell through. And so what seemed like an exciting start turned into this struggle to make ends meet. My mom didn't have her job at the hospice anymore, and my dad didn't have the job at the Chess Federation anymore. And so they pulled themselves up in a way that I can only imagine. And my dad started doing correspondence school online to become an English teacher, and my mom started working at a restaurant, which, you know, she is capable of running corporations, and there she was making ends meet for us. Gosh, you know, she and my dad really saved us. So I never knew that, though. And it's funny when you're a little kid, when other people are struggling to help you, and you just think, wow, this is all so great. I've always had that kind of, I don't know if it's a limitation or if it's a strength, maybe it's both, but I tend to think things are really great where I am, and I project my own happiness onto the situation. So being in the house where initially we didn't have any furniture or any heat was just like a fun camping experience to me back then. And as they built their lives up, I was enamored with the Hudson Valley. We had water in our backyard, a little bit of a pond, And watching the wildlife come in and go out was just an epic opera of experience to me, of seeing the swans come in the spring in pairs, and then the little ducks with their ducklings, and watching the comedy and tragedy of the snapping turtles eating the little ducks and the minnows, but then the triumph of them ultimately flying and growing. I think I really annoyed probably the neighbors, because I'm a big daydreamer, and so I would go down to the lake and I would sing really loud and pretend I was a warrior princess. I would enact these wild fantasies, and I had no idea other people could see me doing it. I was just oblivious to how embarrassing that probably should have been for me. But it started something in me that said, stories. I want to tell stories. I want to tell stories about the water and about the snow and about everyday magic. And I got into gymnastics from there. And you tell me if this is boring you at all, won't you?
You're good to go.
Okay. You're being nice to me. So I joined gymnastics, and I love gymnastics. I had some decent aptitude for it, but I'm a tall person. I'm Finnish. And I saw in the chat earlier, Simon Gibbs asked a question, are you Sami? And I'm not positive, but if he's talking about Sami Swami from Finland, then yes, my mother is 100% Finnish. But being that part of my DNA, and my dad being sort of an Irish Viking, I'm a tall person, and gymnastics not a perfect sport for me. But I did love the floor routine, and my coaches, to their chagrin, would see that at competitions, you have a set routine that's supposed to be exactly the same every time. But when it came my time and the bell rang, and you do your V for victory and start your routine, when the music would start, I would start improvising the routine. It's just like you feel the audience and you want to give them something. And so my coaches would not be stoked to see me doing different dance movements and dramatic aplomb, but that really instilled in my heart, again, this feeling that the audience and I could do something together, that it wasn't me, it was us, it was a co-creation. And from there, having unfortunately broken my back and having a fracture, because I really did, I got too tall, and so I was running back layout routines and drills, and I drilled too hard, and I broke my back, and there really wasn't any coming back from it when you have girls that are 4'3" and 9 years old, and you're getting to 5'8", 5'9". It's just not going to happen. But I did treasure the time that I had in gymnastics, and I didn't want to give up on expression. And from there, I went to a school in the Hudson Valley of New York called the Hudson Valley Conservatory of Fine Arts at the New Rose Theater. And that was run by an amazing director called Samuel Wright. And Sam, he played Sebastian the Crab in the Disney's original The Little Mermaid film. So if you remember Under the Sea, that's Sam.
Legendary song.
Yeah, so legendary. And he also played Mufasa on Broadway as in The Lion King, and name just innumerable other things that he's done. Mm-hmm. He created this place in Walden, New York, in the Hudson Valley, where people that didn't necessarily have all the money to attend these prestigious art schools, Juilliard and all that, would still have the opportunity to get a world-class opportunity to perform in Shakespeare and adaptations of things like The Grapes of Wrath. And I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship from the parents of performing arts students that they call POPs there. I had my life absolutely changed by that experience, because my dad was already so engrossed in Shakespeare through achieving eventually his teaching certification. So I was immersed in that from his end, and my mom is just, she'll never admit it, but she's a wonderful performer and a brilliant woman that I just found home when I was at the Hudson Valley Conservatory. I really did, and I learned I don't know whether I'm a good actor or not, but I certainly tried to do my best, and I got to perform in the legendary Shakespeare pieces, and I got to be a part of these great comedies. I love doing things that are funny and silly. I got to be in The Producers as Carmen Gia and do crazy cartwheels and farcical things. And I also learned to be a director. And that, again, was a pivotal moment for me, was being able to take children that were coming up and give them the opportunity to find who they were by playing other people. I think there's a huge amount of freedom, and I think you can relate to this because you're a video game guy, where when you get to play someone else, you find out a lot about yourself. Is who am I and what am I doing? Yes. Why do I make these choices, right? Mm-hmm. Don't you find that's true as you select your character? You know, what are your strengths and attributes, like with role-playing games? What's my charisma? What's my wisdom? Who do I choose to play? And why is this fun? Or why is this other character more fun to play? So seeing that come out in kids and young adults was a great thing for me to be able to help establish for them. And my life just sort of takes me on a journey forward. From there, having worked with the kids, I started working on video games. I am an autodidact, as so many people that you and I know are at this point, where I took many tutorials and I learned programming. And so I started actually making little independent video games, you know, nothing that you would have heard of, just small little things where I would program the AI and do some world building and that sort of thing. And a director that I had worked with in my previous time, his name is William James Edwards, and he's an incredible guy. He's a Freemason. He's just a wonderful person, loves to give to charity, but he tries to work on projects that are meaningful, and I appreciate that so much. And he sent a script to me, having worked on some video games with him, as well as an expansion for the Elder Scrolls line of games, which was so fun. Our game was called Et in Arche Ego, if anybody wants to play that mod. But I digress. He said to me, Mara, you know, we make these games, but maybe we can reach people more broadly if we work on a film. And you have this acting background. And I had been directing the voiceover work for the video games anyway, connected back to my Hudson Valley Conservatory past from when I was a little bit younger. Mm-hmm. And he sent me a script as well as a package of journal notes. He said, we should look into this story. And I never looked for this. I'm interested in the paranormal, but I really wasn't a person that was pursuant of it in any way. I like things that are magical, and I'm a huge fraidy cat when it comes to things that are scary. But he sent me a script and a packet of journal notes, and these journal notes were from a haunting that happened in 1985 at a college in Western New York, about 5 hours away from where I grew up. The college is called Geneseo. And a man named John Jeff Ungar, well, a kid at the time, an 18, 19-year-old kid at the time, wrote down what happened to he and his friends over the course of months at this college, this series of events that changed their lives, these dark things. And what arose for me from these notes, where I wasn't a person who wasn't looking into the paranormal, was this realization that real human stories, like the ones you highlight, Jeffrey, are at the heart of everything. And I watched in these notes as it unfolded that these friendships started to coalesce in the face of adversity. John Jeff Ungar's friend, Chris DiCesare, he experienced the haunting in the greatest focus. And between Jeff and Chris, as I would learn to call them, they built a friendship that brought tears to my eyes, and that gave me hope. And in the periphery of their wonderful friends, people like Craig Norris and Linda Fox Kalsinski, a priest that came to bless the room, Father Charlie Manning. It struck me how heroes are all around us. Heroes are in your house, and heroes are at Walmart. Heroes are at the gas station and on the street. It's going to make me teary-eyed to think about that. But they survived something. Whether you believe in the paranormal or not, they survived something that challenged their worldview, that changed their paradigms. And how many of us can relate to that? Something that comes and changes everything, questions everything, and you have to throw out the whole apple cart of everything that you believed in and build from zero. And the idea that they could come back from that and trust each other. Oh, how valuable is trust? How easily lost, and how strong it is when you do gain it, and when you allow somebody the opportunity to hurt you through trust. It blew me away. And I read these notes, and I agreed with William Edwards Bill that this needed to be a film. And so I reached out to the person who wrote the journal notes, John Jeff Ungar, and he didn't remember having written them at first. So what? Oh yeah, like a movie sounds great, but what are we talking about here? And I started reading to him from his journal notes, and you could hear his voice change, and the memories came flooding back. And this darkness he had put behind him, he had burned the original journal notes, or so he thought. A friend of his made photocopies back in 1985 and had distributed throughout Western New York. And a friend of a friend gave a copy to my producer, and oh my gosh, these are the notes that I wrote. And he remembered. And long story short, I directed that film. It's called Please Talk With Me. That really isn't like a jump horror scary film. It's really a human experience that looks at what these kids went through in 1985. And the cast and crew we had is just unbelievably amazing, and the witnesses, first and foremost, are incredible. But after having made that film, John Jeff Ungar became my best friend, I'm very honored to say, and my soulmate, and I married him a couple of years ago now. So that story, I guess it was meant to be, even though I didn't see it coming. It ended up being everything in my life, and John Jeff Ungar is one of those heroes that I get to see every day. And I was a fan of his before I ever met him, and now he's my husband.
Why were you a fan of his? What drew you towards him?
What a cool question. He puts people in front of himself. He is a person, is a rare person who is incredibly talented, brilliant, wonderful writer. He can draw, he's cool, he's funny, he's this rare books collections cataloger. He's got all these things under his belt, but all he ever does is put people up in front of himself. He lifts other people, and you can see it in his journal notes, and you can feel it when you're talking to him, that he will make the world around him a better place. And if you're not paying attention, you won't even know that it's him that's doing it. His hand is very subtle. He's a brilliant person, and I love that. I think that people like that can save the world, that can work in the background and make things better around themselves, and he's the epitome of that. So I was a big fan, and I still am.
He's able to help others by inviting them to how would you say, a good story that people are willing to partake in order to make it interesting for everybody.
Wow. I love how you put that, Jeffrey.
One thing that comes forward in your whole story, and you went over a couple of major moments in your life. So your childhood, the video game section, and the filmmaking as well. One of the things that comes forward is that you, at least to me right now, you seem to have a natural, I'm not sure if it's an instinct or proclivity or something else, but the word expression comes forward quite strongly for me. From the moment that you wore your nightgown and you were looking into the sky, to the moment that you were on the campsite in the valley, being very perceptive of the animals around you and of the nature around you and of the wind around you, to also later on, more practically, taking place in the Shakespeare pieces. You seem to be a very, I'm not sure if it's necessarily creative, but you seem to be very perceptive of what is happening around you in a creative way. Is it something that comes natural to you, do you think? And how did you develop that, and how early did you develop that? And maybe a second question, which I hope as a simple answer, that nightgown moment. How old were you then? So can you walk me through that process, that experience for you, and also provide me with a timeline of how old you were since you were experiencing this? I hope it makes sense.
It makes great sense, and it's my privilege. Thank you for the insightful question, and it moves me to consider these things further. The timeline I'll cover first. The nightgown moment. I'm 2.5 years old, so there I am.
Oh, very young.
I had basically, I'm a redhead now, but back then my hair was white, stark white, because you're a little kid. Yeah, little. And I'm going to give you a very short story to talk about whether or not I'm perceptive and creative. You just be the judge. This is not a, it's sort of an embarrassing story, I think. I didn't want to go to school. I really didn't want to go to school. I wanted to stay at home. And I remember crying and not wanting to go to kindergarten. Don't make me go. And, I held on to my mom's legs. I remember her warm leg in the denim she was wearing. And she's like, you got to go. You're going to love it. And so I went to kindergarten and I made friends, I think. And I started doing something apparently where I would lead kids in make-believe sessions, and I would invent stories when I was there during like playtimes and things like that. So I would make up the idea of these magical animals, and here's the adventure that we're on. And I was just a huge daydreamer, and I ended up being held back. They thought maybe I had learning disabilities and things like that, because my head was so in the sky. So I couldn't stay with my friends.
You seemed very distracted.
Big time.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Very distracted and very daydreamy. And so my friends moved on and I stayed. I didn't know. That's how distracted I was. It was like, oh, I guess I'm just here again. Whee! I didn't. I didn't even notice. I just noticed my friends weren't there anymore. And then a year or two later, a girl that I recognized saw me on the school bus, and I knew she must be older than me because she was in a grade higher. And she said, Mara, what happened to you? You used to run the best games of make-believe, and then you weren't there anymore. And I was like, oh, I guess I was held back. I guess you're in a grade older than me because I didn't move along with everybody else. So you can take from that what you will. I have my limitations and I have my strengths.
Yeah, you had quite the imagination as a very young child already.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so whether that's intrinsic, I think so. I think it's almost perforce, to use a Shakespearean word. If there's something that comes to me, it doesn't come to me. It comes through me. It wants to be known, and I just hope that it's helpful to people around me if I'm expressing something. I hope it does something positive, and I feel at the mercy of that, and I'm honored to be that way, I think.
Mm-hmm. One question I would like to ask on that. You had quite a big imagination, quite clearly. Were you more the type that would act out their imagination, or could you also, for example, or were you more the person that would also, for example, read books in order to passively imagine the scenario that you're reading? And the reason why I'm asking this specific question, so the acting out versus the more passive reading, is because I believe you were also influenced by your parents' storytelling, and specifically the Arthurian legends in particular. So how do these, in this case, these ancient myths tie into this story?
Wow, that's a cool question. In many ways. And it reminds me of what Frankie Joy Baylor said in the chats, like which book would you gift to others the most and why?
Right.
And it really connects into what you're saying, the Arthurian legends. I think in life, when you pull back and, from being close to the picture, and you draw back and you draw back, you start to see patterns, and those patterns can reveal some really interesting things. In the Arthurian legends, you see archetypes. So you see the archetype of Arthur, you see the archetype of the Lady of the Lake, Vivian, or Mirove, of the Merovingians, and you see the Green Knight, as so many people are wonderfully talking about right now, and you see Gawain, and you see the hunt for the Holy Grail. And when my father would tell me stories at night, they had shades of those stories, and when my mother would tell me stories, it had shades of those concepts with regard to the unicorn or the Pegasus. And when you pull back from that, one of the things that made me really sad when I was small was I read the Chronicles of Narnia, as so many of us have, and I loved them, but it broke my heart, because I thought, I can't find the door. I can't find the door to Narnia. I can't get there. Does that mean I'm not worthy of that? And is it real, or is magic just not real in this world? And it made me very sad for a while. And I remember having the realization in bed one day that it was there if you had the eyes to see it. And if you ever laughed at something, or you heard a beautiful song, or you saw the sunrise, if you missed that there's magic in that, that's on you. That's on you. And it's a really incredibly beautiful world. And these archetypes, in Arthurian legends, we see them play out in the best of the modern films and books. They're part of us, and it really connects into the music that I'm making right now with regard to my album, which is called Modern M, which is going to be here early 2025, where I really try to explore this idea of archetypes, of who are we and who are we looking up to, and who have we left behind, and what's worth putting forward and bolstering, what's worth emphasizing and shining a light on. I think Edith Wharton talked about the idea that there's two kinds of light: the light that the candle shines and the mirror that reflects it. And that's a bad paraphrase, but I love the meaning where you can be a mirror and light can be endlessly shown everywhere. And so back to the idea of the books, my dad is a writer, and before he passed away, he had been working on a book for 10 years at least that is called Pilgrim Heart. And can I read you a quick passage from it? Would that be untoward?
No, go ahead. Absolutely.
It's really not long. He would pass away months after he published this. And I have it on my website, which is marakatria.com. And if you look up the book Pilgrim Heart, if you buy it, then 100% of any proceeds just go to St. Jude's. That's what my dad wanted to support. So if anybody wants a copy of the book, that's what that is. But
I'll make sure to put it in the description as well.
Oh, thank you for that. Thank you. So this is the last paragraph, page 296. He wrote, months before he passed away, "The poet let go of my hand on December 26th. He gazed quizzically at my sorrow and breathed his last in the warm glow of an unusually scarlet sunset. Without saying goodbye, he seems to have endured no physical pain or sense of sadness any greater than anyone who has ever lived and died. And from what I could tell, he withdrew from our world without significant regret. He had simply come to the end of his book, and he was at peace with the turning of its last page. His mother was calling him home, and he left straight away, as if he had something important to tell her. And so he ended his opus. And so that's the book I'd recommend. Sorry. Thanks. So I'm very proud of him. I know we're not supposed to use the word proud, so I'll say I'm inspired and gratified by him. And that was not long ago that he passed away, and so it's not a tragic event, although life is full of those lights in the dark sky, and the dark sky is there so that things can be so brilliant. And he did a great job. And he is you, and he is our friends on our journey. These wonderful people that you've interviewed, he would love Adam and Haley and Donna and Akira and Ryan and Cole and Danny and Maureen and all the people that you will interview, people that I think will air before our episode does. I have loved hearing your stories, Jeffrey, the stories that you've shared via their bravery and your giving, and as well as your own. And just to not let me get too heavy, can you tell me the story of how you met your wife having something to do with the video game Left 4 Dead?
Thank you for sharing that passage from your father. It's quite clear. It's quite clear. Well, obviously that he means the world to you, but also that he had a great, profound impact on you. Not just in the last couple of months before that event, but also before you. Once again, back to the moments that he was sharing those legends with you, those Arthurian legends, and it gave you an opportunity to explore different realms. You mentioned Narnia as a realm. That all of a sudden, while you were laying in bed, you realized that it might not be real within air quotes, but yet it is, because generally speaking, when we get older, we, I think, are less susceptible to the magic, to the special, to what makes every day, every interaction beautiful and magical. And I think this is also what you didn't explicitly say it, but I think you hinted at it, that it is a beautiful thing to allow yourself to keep that gateway to the magic open, to keep exploring, to keep being playful, and to have these beautiful interactions and to appreciate them and to love them and to make beautiful things out of it, pretty much. I think that's what you're, and correct me if anything that I'm saying is incorrect, but I think that's what your father symbolizes to you. That's how I'm hearing that right now. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say that's very fair, my friend.
Yeah. Allow yourself to reopen the door to Narnia. I think that's a very good takeaway from that.
Well, beautiful. Thank you. Hey, I think you probably have a couple of listeners that are fans of Tolkien, so they might like my dad's last words to me before he passed away, that he was walking with Varda, which is the sort of the goddess of starlight.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, very, very cool. That's the elven lady from the first movie, right?
Well, she is sort of an unseen. I think it's the Valar. My brain is a jumble right now, but a Valar, which is to say, if I can get very nerdy, you have
Sure, go ahead.
Eru Iluvatar, who sings the world into being at the very beginning, and he is the sort of the unified single god above all, and he brings the world into being through his song and the singing of the Valar. They take up different parts of that symphony, and Varda is one of these, sort of upper beings, but below Eru Iluvatar, who governs light and starlight. And she's sort of an unseen force to make sure that things never go completely dark.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you asked me a question. How I met my wife, right?
A little bit of deflection on my part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we have that connection through the video games. I adore video games, and I loved how you talked recently about your wife and that sort of kismet moment of a game you were playing, Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, for sure. That was on 19 August 2011. That specific game.
Amazing.
I believe it was in the evening, and it's indeed a game called Left 4 Dead. Sounds a bit morbid, but it's a game.
It's flippin' fun.
Yeah, it's really, really fun. It's just a good time it's one of the best ways. Well, at least in that time, it was one of the best ways to just spend time with some friends and hang out and just do the most goofy things you can think of. It's very simple in its essence. It's a game in which you have to go from point A to point B, and you are in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. So, yeah. That's good luck. Try to do whatever you can to get to point B. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And that day I was, and I believe it was an evening. I was playing with a back then a good friend of mine. We have no longer contact. It was an online friend, so not a friend that's living in my neighborhood, but a good guy called Shane from Ireland. And just the two of us, we were just having fun. And, it's a 4-player game, so the other 2 people are just random people that load into your game, pretty much. And one of them was this player who was silent, didn't have a microphone, so couldn't talk. And that was fine. Shane and I were talking, we were hanging out, we were having fun, and we were quite experienced in the game. We played it for a couple of 100 hours already, so we knew our way around. And this new player didn't really have that experience, which was fine. So we went along, and we went. There's a couple of levels that you have to go through. We finished the first level, and then we were at the second level. And once again, you have to go from point A to point B. In the middle of that level is a panic event. And a panic event is being defined as a moment where you are in a room, all the exits are closed, so you can't leave, and you have to do pretty much a standoff. So you're being attacked non-stop, and you have to go through that until everything, until all the zombies are gone, pretty much. What happened is that we were sitting with all of us in a corner, so we pretty much had to, just keep track of 2 sides instead of 4 sides. And we were just standing off. And then this random player without a microphone thought it was a genius idea to grab a Molotov cocktail and throw it ahead. And generally speaking, that's a very smart idea, right? Because then there's fire everywhere, and you're good to go, and you can wait a little bit, and it's all that's a good idea. But this one hit a pipe and bounced back. So all of us, we died.
Leroy Jenkins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so this is the moment, right, in Left 4 Dead, because generally speaking, when something like that happens, everybody is angry, and that player who did that is getting kicked out, because we never want to play with the player again. But that was not what happened. Shane and I, first of all, we were obviously quite confused about it, but we were just, we were laughing about it, we pressed continue, we started over, and it was perfectly fine. And that player who didn't have a microphone was like, hey, I didn't get kicked. What's this? This is like completely not expected at all. So at the end of the game, when we were finished, because there's 5 levels you have to go through, so we finished level 5. And at the end, that player sent me a friend request. So yeah, one thing led to another. We started having contact, and she introduced herself. I introduced myself. We had contact for a couple of months. I traveled to Poland because that's where she's from.
Wow.
Which was there's quite a story behind that, because that wasn't. It was an impulse reaction on my side, because there were some ideas of your son just traveling to a different country all by himself to meet a person who he has never met before. So back then my parents were they were raising their eyebrows, but you know what, sometimes you just have to take a risk.
Wow.
And that is what I did. And well, long story short, exactly 10 years later, so on 19 August 2011 we met each other. That's the moment that we had the game. And on 19 August 2021, during the Corona time, that's when we got married.
Wow.
Yeah, and we're still going strong.
That is so awesome. I love it. Well, congratulations. And at the time of this recording, your engagement anniversary is coming up pretty soon. Is that right?
It's October now, so... sorry, engagement. Yeah, you're completely right. That was... you're completely right. That was Halloween. Let me think. That was Halloween 2020, the year before.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme throughout the relationship. Horror games and just creepy things and Halloween. We love that. It's lovely. Yeah.
That's so fun. I love it. And congratulations continuously. That's the joy of life right there. For
sure. Yeah, for sure. I also love the way that you your experience obviously is very different, but it's very funny how you went from one thing to the other, that you got the notes for that paranormal event, and that in the end that person turned out, a couple of steps forward, turned out to be your husband in the end.
Yes, I didn't see it coming. I suppose that's the beauty, right? We don't want to see everything coming. What a great way to live. And yeah, it can be hard, but at least there's good surprises in there too, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Shall I tell you about the connection between Jeff and the film and then onto the current music project?
Yeah, that's completely fine, and I'm especially also curious about those notes. So,
ask away.
Maybe you don't have to tell me everything because I'm not sure how many notes those are. But I asked this question to you before, but I'm really curious what was in that. So hopefully, you could share something of that.
Oh, yeah. I should have a copy on me, but what I can say is, because I have them almost memorized, is there's almost a book's worth of journal notes. And this was in 1985. So just setting that in context, Jeff looks incredibly young, but he's a little bit older than I am, and I wasn't, around at that time, but I have researched extensively the paranormal field to try to get the authenticity in the film. In 1985, the paranormal was not how we perceive it today in pop culture. There were not TV shows and teams with T-shirts and let's go investigate and fun films, and it was not like that back then. If somebody said, "Oh, I'm experiencing a ghost," that was basically the occult. It was taboo back then. And so when he wrote down the journal notes, he was one of maybe 4 prominent hauntings that documented what was going on in that way. So he's sort of a proto paranormal researcher, not that he knew it at the time. And he was very, very interested in a show that aired back then, hosted by Leonard Nimoy, which was In Search Of, and all of these really cool topics. He's just like this guy who was well read on science and technology and the paranormal and how all of that connects. And so his journal notes were partially informed by his interest in those things. He had a very scientific approach as a person who liked the topic, but also as a skeptic. And so they were very informative and helpful with regard to kind of talking to the witness in a way that wouldn't contaminate them. So he was very kind when he would speak with Chris DeCesare and the other students who experienced the haunting, but he also made sure not to ask leading questions to see if their stories would corroborate each other, to understand what was going on around him. And so his journal notes are fascinating because they begin from wondering if this could be actually happening to realizing, yes, this was, and then also documenting his own experiences within the haunting, which wasn't something that he saw coming. The haunting intensified over the course of several weeks, and it began with what they called zones of cold, where they would measure with temperature gauges, and they would have other independent people come in and see if they could experience that. And then there were the disembodied voices that started coming in. And ultimately,
what does that mean, a disembodied voice?
Oh, so one of the most prominent moments with regard to that was Chris DeCesare was sitting in his dorm room, and he had experienced these zones of colds, and he was starting to feel a bit strange in the dorm room. But he was working at a typewriter. It was back then, we're talking about 85, and so he was writing a research paper, and he heard someone call his name, Chris. Okay. And he thought, and Jeff documents this, that Chris thought it was somebody playing a prank in the hallway. They were in a dorm. There's lots of guys. It's just, it's the quad, so somebody's playing a joke on me.
And did Jeff hear it as well, the voice?
Jeff was not there, so he documents this afterwards. Good question.
Okay.
Very good question. So Chris reports that he heard the voice, and then he goes back to his research paper and hears the voice again. And he said, quit it. I'm not going to be distracted by you. I got to do this research paper. I've got a deadline coming up. And so he puts on headphones from his dorm mates stereo, and it's this song. I'm not I'm not real familiar with it. It was like, I can't drive 55, this rock song. And so he
Perfectly fitting.
exactly right. So he cranks up this rock song. This is like hair metal 80s stuff, and he's like, I'm just gonna concentrate, have this hardcore music on. And he hears in his ears, inside the headphones and beyond the music, loud, Chris. And he is completely shaken by this experience. He throws the headphones, he almost breaks them against the wall, and he runs, and he goes banging on the next dorm's door. So the room numbers are C2D1, where the haunting occurred, and C2D2, where Jeff is. So he runs from C2D1 to C2D2, and he's banging on that door, and he's saying, I'm panicking, I panicked, I can't believe I panicked. And it's Jeff who opens the door, and that's how Jeff hears about the haunting for the first time. Jeff sees his buddy, Chris, panicking. Chris was a long-distance track runner, and so that's what Jeff knew about Chris, is that he's just this consistent guy that's trying to get into the Olympics, basically. So he was pretty surprised to see that Chris was so in a state of not even being able to talk. It was a state of absolute terror, and it took...
How did Jeff react to that?
Well, it's interesting. Jeff had a lot of experiences in his early life with some big things that happened to his family members that made him kind of the voice of consistency and reason. So when things would go wild around him, he would often be a person that provided a level of calm. And so he was oddly kind of prepared for being kind to Chris, but also not feeding into the frenzy of what was happening. What he was very concerned with from the beginning was not causing something that he would have considered to be a mass panic. He didn't want the terror to be contagious on the campus. So he spoke very kindly and asked slow questions. And his reaction was internal. And he'll always say this. He tries to create a calm demeanor on the outside, but on the inside, he felt the panic as well. He just didn't want to portray that. He didn't want to feed into that. So internally,
he saw in Chris's eyes that it was real. So that's what also took him over internally.
You said it.
He knew it was serious.
You said it. Perfect. Yep, that's right. So that was the disembodied voice. Yeah. Yep, and that escalated. It escalated. Actually, I should say it de-escalated before it escalated, because as things started to intensify, they actually reached out to a parapsychologist that was on the campus, and they spoke with him about how they could approach this, because there was a new field, talking about ESP and things like that. And so the parapsychologist on the campus was very interested in and gave some tips and tricks about maybe recording the voice or like I say, recording the temperatures, as we talked about with the zones of cold. So that seemed helpful initially, but it didn't get rid of the ghost, which was really what Chris wanted. He just wanted to get back to running. Jeff was interested in the paranormal, but Chris was not. He did not want the haunting anywhere near him. So his goal was to resolve this and move past it. And in an effort to do that, he ended up reaching out to, at the urging of some of his fellow students, a Catholic priest who worked at the Interfaith Center up in town, so it's maybe a half a mile away. They walked up there and reached out to them, and eventually got in contact with a very cool and friendly priest who I have had the honor of interviewing, Father Charlie Manning. He came out and he did not an exorcism. This is important, he says, not an exorcism, but a blessing. And he came and he blessed the room. And for a long time after that, the haunting subsided completely in the room specifically. But other students, specifically girls, started reporting intensifying paranormal activity in their part of the dormitory. And they would hear Chris's name. The ghost would keep calling Chris's name, Chris, to multiple different students.
So it was like attached to Chris.
Yes, and they theorized that it was not happy with being pushed out of the room and being pushed away from Chris. And so when that started to occur, Chris ended up being physically attacked in the bathroom and had a series of scratches on his back and was knocked out, and it got very dark for Chris at that point, and he ended up having to face the ghost in a sense and tell it, listen, if you want to talk to me, you talk to me, you don't go attacking my friends. And that was his breaking point.
This has been reported. So what do the reports say about this specific incident if you read into it?
Well, the reports themselves from the time are just Jeff's journal notes and the evidences that they collected at the time. This is something that no one really thought would get as big as it did. It became like a local legend in Western New York for, again, so I started working on this in the 2010s. So it was decades on before I got involved with it. But it was sort of a local legend, like the Lady in White or the Ghost of Erie Hall, so to speak. But the television show Sci-Fi School Spirits heard about our film and created a big TV show with Mark Burnett from the TV show Survivor. And so they do a version of the story. And there's another big network that's looking at creating a version of their own in the coming months. It's top secret, so I can't tell you exactly what it is, but they have a big project that'll come out probably within a half a year as well that uses all of these incidences and talks with the survivors about what their experiences are with the whole haunting, including the attack. So it's a good question.
Did they before, because I have a couple of questions about the details of what happened.
Sure.
But before we go into the details, what do you make of all of this?
Do you mean with regard to the haunting or the fallout? What can I share? I'd be happy to.
Yeah. So the whole event in general. So from the notes that you've read to the experience, to the attack, to the voice that Chris heard, and that later on, primarily the women in dorm rooms also experienced. When you hear those things, what do you make of that?
I think there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophies, as we would say in Shakespeare. I don't like the darkness, and I don't enjoy delving into the scarier aspects of things. However, I do very, very much enjoy the metaphysical and spiritual and the transcendent. And I suppose Jordan Peterson is a philosopher we both enjoy, and he explores the idea, as well as Ian McGilchrist, that if you go far enough in one direction philosophically, you eventually meet its tail end on the other side. And so they would say, and I think it's arguably true, that if you look enough into the dark, you eventually find the light. And I suppose then, if you look far enough into the light, you eventually find the dark and dovetail back. And my feeling with having made beautiful video games and trying to find the core of the human spirit, that I also came across some of the darker aspects of the metaphysical, having not looked for that. And then having looked into the darkness of the haunting, I then found the light in the people that were involved with it. And for the record, I believe them. I make of it that ghosts are real and that their experience is valid. Yeah.
Did they manage to pin down what the entity was, what they theorized about it? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because you mentioned that it was not an exorcism. You were quite clear on that, but it was a blessing.
Right.
So those are two, I guess those are two specific techniques that you can apply in different situations. And if you ask me, and this is where my video game logic comes forward, so I'm not,
Nice.
there's no other knowledge at play here. So this is complete guess. So correct me if I'm wrong. But was the reason that they didn't perform an exorcism, but they performed a blessing, because they were dealing with a specific entity that required that? Do you know that?
Wow, excellent question. That really hits on something super important with regard to the paranormal in general, as well as something important to the people involved. Jeffrey, excellent question, and there's a very specific answer to that. The reason I'm particular with regard to the idea that it's a blessing and not an exorcism is Father Charlie gave Chris a long series of questions before he ever decided to help out, because this is a college, and college kids, they get up to some exciting business. They could be drinking, they could be having certain smoking products. Who knows, right? These are young experimental kids. You can't just believe them if they say, "Oh, it's a ghost. Come to my dorm room." That can mean any number of prank type things. So he wanted to vet out what's going on here. Is this a mental thing? Is this a drug thing? Is this a spiritual thing? What's going on? So he asked a lot of questions and sussed out Chris's character. And one of the things that he eventually concentrated on was, do you feel that you are possessed? Are your thoughts your own? And, is this something that feels demonic? And, that's scary stuff to talk about. But I think it's important that he made the distinction that this seemed to be a ghost that was in a state of unrest and not a demonic possession of any kind. And so the blessing was to encourage the spirit to move on, as opposed to casting out a demon, so to speak. So I think you ask an excellent question. It's an important one for anybody to think about who might be experiencing something like that.
Yeah, so it was an entity that was based on a human.
Right. Well said.
Instead of something like a demon or something that is out of this world, pretty much.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right, because that's when you would use an exorcism.
I believe so. Yeah,
okay.
and you ask another pertinent question with regard to that. So I'm not probably in a way I am an expert on this haunting because I've spent 10 years researching it, but I don't claim expertise. But what I can tell you with regard to who the ghost may probably be, it sounds like you were alluding to, is that?
If the ghost is if the ghost is from a human, then my next question indeed will be, which human and what happened?
Yeah. This is a fascinating story. So you have to let me know if I run on too long. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Okay.
So we were finishing up making the film. No one really knew who the ghost was. There was a couple of theories from back in the day. The way that things ended for Jeff and Chris after the blessing and then after the attack, Chris ended up having to face the idea that you can't just push it away. You have to talk. You have to communicate. And that's why the film is called Please Talk With Me to some degree. There's a couple of reasons, but that's one of the reasons. And so like you and me, we're having a dialogue, and it'll be something I remember forever. I think talking and trusting is incredibly powerful. But I digress. Chris decided that he needed to face what was happening if he wanted it to stop attacking the people he cared about, in a sense, as well as let him get back to his own life and take control again. And so he remembered the blessing that Father Charlie had done, and he had a conversation with his friend Craig Norris, who gave him a lot of support, and he got his act together in a sense, and he went into the room and he invited the ghost in, which is something he never thought he would end up having to do. He wanted it to be gone, and the idea of reaching out to the thing he was trying to push away was antithesis to him. But he did it, and he put out some candles and he said some prayers.
And this was in those same dorm rooms?
Yes, in his original dorm room where the blessing had kept the ghost out. He invited it back in.
And where you heard the voice. Yeah.
Exactly
Right.
right. Yes. And he felt the shadows move, he felt the temperature in the room change, and he could see the entity in front of him. It was partially solid, partially not. I shouldn't say it. He looked like a young man with his head cocked to one side, with his mouth open, and I just want to say trigger warning for anybody who's listening to this. I know these days that some people have a hard time hearing about, some of the darker aspects of things. So if you don't like blood and guts, this is your warning to tune back in about a minute and a half, let's say. But so this entity had blood coming out of his mouth, and he was missing his nose, and just horrifying at his torso, and after that, sort of like a phase through, you couldn't really see the feet. And he looked at the ghost, and the ghost looked at him with these desperate eyes, and Chris said, if you're going to move on, you have to let go. You have to move on. I'll help you if I can. And the ghost talked about having so much regret, so sorry, such a mistake. And he used words like local areas and Danville, as far as where he came from. And Chris was very confused. He didn't recognize anything the ghost was saying, but he basically tried to give him peace and let him know it was okay to move on. And the ghost did seem to move on after that. The dorm got warmer, people got happier. There were no more reports of the paranormal after that. But people didn't know who the ghost was. Chris and Jeff both did a lot of research on what Danville was, what's a big mistake. Some people thought there might have been something like suicide involved, wondered about the head being cocked at that angle. What does that mean? But people really didn't have answers initially. When we were finishing up the film, that was still the case. And the sci-fi television show was very interested in working on their own version of the story. And they said, well, if we're going to make this story, we have to know who the ghost was. That's our formula. So our film, we don't have a formula. We just tell the story exactly as it is. But sci-fi, it's TV, it's pulpy. They feel like they have to tell something in an hour time slot, and they have this way of wrapping it up at the end. It's like, we need to know who the ghost was. And so we all, but especially Chris, started trying to do research on, just theories. Who could the ghost have been? Didn't really know. Wouldn't you know it, Chris's mother was doing family research at the same time, just of her own accord, having nothing to do with any of this, and trying to figure out what their family tree looked like. Who's grandpa, who's great-grandpa, how far can I take the family tree back? The same thing that some of us do with, understand myself, or making their family trees with the DNA tests and stuff, that sort of thing. And she reported to Chris, oh, this is really cool. You'll never believe that your great-great-grandfather and your, I think, great-great-grand-uncle were part of the Sullivan campaign in Western New York for Washington during the Revolutionary War, in conflict with the Native Americans. And they were part of this gruesome conflict, a very complicated conflict without an obvious right side, by the way. But Chris started researching these Hubleys in his heritage, and realized that they buried a person named Thomas Boyd. This is an important name because Jeff, during his journal notes, had recorded, hey, if you thought the ghost had a name, what name would you give it? And he asked like a dozen different kids, what do you think the ghost's name would be? And independently, he got the name Tommy. And he asked people, well, why do you think the ghost name is Tommy? And one person said, well, I don't know, my parakeet is named Tommy. And another person said, it was like, Tommy, can you hear me? Like the musical. And they have all these different reasons for calling the ghost Tommy. So that became the code name of the ghost. Well, the Hubleys, Chris's great relatives, they actually buried the body of Thomas Boyd, who led the Sullivan campaign, and he had a huge failure in his leading. I hate to put it that way. So there was a mistake, and he went to the wrong place at the wrong time impetuously and was captured by the Native Americans, and he had his nose removed. Again, trigger warning here, and he was disemboweled. His intestines were wrapped around a tree. He was forced to march. But worse than that for him is the whole group of people that he was leading forward in this effort were also slaughtered and tortured. And so he had a bad end. And so Chris's relatives were the ones who found Boyd and Parker, who were the leaders of that campaign, and they buried those bodies. And so some people theorize very strongly that Tommy may have been Thomas Boyd, letting genealogically Chris know that, you know, a mistake was made, and that the spirit can't get over the guilt of the mistake that happened.
The regret.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Was Thomas buried near the dorm rooms?
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, you got some real good questions, my friend. So the place where Thomas was tortured is a place that's, a half a mile away from the dorm room, and it is now called, historically there's a plaque there people can visit called the Torture Tree. And so that's where that happened, and they moved the body another couple of miles from the Torture Tree and buried Boyd with a marker nearby. So yes, exactly right. And in addition to that, Chris actually broke his knee at the Torture Tree. He never knew it was the Torture Tree. We found out about all of this decades later, but he said, I ended my running career running past this gnarly tree, and as I now find out decades later, this is the Torture Tree.
What a story.
Yeah, it is. So you can see why I had to reach out to this John Jeff character, right?
Yeah. What a story.
I know.
Because just so I got this clear, so the very first moment that Chris became aware, or that there was even talks of being a hunting event going on, was the moment that Chris heard his name a couple of times. There was there was nothing else before that pretty much started this story. It was that moment, and consequently Chris reaching out to Jeff, who then documented it. That was the start of the story.
That's the start of the haunting, absolutely.
Right.
Chris
Okay.
is often asked, did you ever experience any kind of other paranormal activity in your life? And he would say that he had moments, like as a kid, where maybe he'd kind of know somebody who was about to call. Like he'd know the phone was about to ring about 20 seconds before it would ring and things like that. So there were a couple of moments here or there, but he was American as apple pie. He liked baseball. He liked running. He liked Elvis. He wanted nothing to do with the paranormal. He's a great friend. They're best friends now. And Chris was the best man at our wedding. But Chris and Jeff they're a lot like each other because they're both wonderful, funny, smart people, but they are polar opposites in their interests with regard to the paranormal.
How's Chris doing today?
Well, he's doing well. He's a giving person, and he gives a lot of himself to other people. And so if you were to ask him, he'd be like, I'm doing great. I'm really proud of my family. I'm super happy that what I'm doing can be helpful to people. As his friend, I can say he gives a lot of himself and he wears himself pretty thin. So I think he's doing well. But, you know, I would, if he listens to this, I'd encourage him to go to Dairy Queen and get yourself a peanut butter parfait because you deserve a treat, Chris.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but he's okay. He's got a good family, wonderful kids. He's now a grandfather for the first time, and he's so proud of her. And he's working on his memoir currently, which will be amazing. Looking forward to The Ghost Boy of Erie Hall that he's been encouraged to write. So I think that'll probably be out within a year. He's doing well. I'm proud of him.
What's the book called, you said?
It's The Ghost Boy of Erie Hall. Would you believe this? I didn't even mention it. The dorm where they attended school was called Erie Hall. Now, this is spelled Erie as in Lake Erie, but still, it sounds kind of appropriate with regard to everything that happened.
What do you call this? Is the word synchronicity?
Yes, synchronicity.
Is that the word? Yeah. Especially with that name situation. That they were all calling him Tommy. That's an insane coincidence. Yeah.
Agree.
So you laid the whole story out of the event and also how it ended. Where does your movie start and where does your movie end? So which part of that story gets captured?
I think we did a pretty excuse me. Got a froggy in my throat. There we go. I would say that it does a pretty good job of leaping through a little bit of Chris's childhood and Jeff's, and it begins before the haunting commences, and it ends. I would say basically with the releasing of the ghost in a sense. So I would say it pretty much covers the whole 9 yards. It's possible that in the next 2 years, I'm going to be creating a director's cut of the film if there's interest in it, so that I can put some of our additional material, because it's such a broad, sweeping story that, I don't know, I think you could talk about it for 10 hours and still not be done, considering what happened during the haunting. But the film Please Talk With Me, the classic version, it covers those events, and then there is a 30th anniversary version of it that sort of condenses it, but it has really nice interviews with the people that actually experienced the haunting. So there's one that's more of a straight documentary, and the other one version has the talking head interviews. We're not selling that on Amazon or anything right now because of all these other stories that are in the mix with Sci-Fi and this other television network. And we don't want them to feel like we're trying to compete with them, even though we're the ones who told the story initially.
Right.
But in the next year, if people are really interested, I might release my director's cut, which combines both of those versions of the film. But if people love the paranormal, if they just really enjoy the story, we have sort of a under the radar version of the film. If you go to my website, marakatria.com, and you look up Please Talk With Me under my media, I have some limited edition discs available. If people have a DVD player, they can get it like that if they're interested.
I'll be sure to put that one in the description as well. It sounds like for everybody who's listening, who finds this story captivating and interesting, at the very least, because I think there's quite a bit to explore here. But sure, go to the description and click the link there, because that's where you will be able to find it. Perfectly fine. Beautiful.
Yeah.
What a story, Mara. This is
Epic
not one you
stuff.
hear every day. Yeah. Have you ever had, well, not a haunting, but did you ever had an experience yourself that you would classify as, maybe abnormal, or I'm not sure really what the right word is, but anything that's not material, pretty much. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Wow. Yeah. I think I would put it this way. I've spent some time, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I think that your listeners will know what I'm saying when I mention the idea that we we see the world through certain frameworks, narratives, and concepts. And those can be very helpful for efficiency in helping us process what's going on. And so I might view the world through an Arthurian framework, or I might view the world through a social media framework, or I might view the world through playing D&D, or I might view the world through my high school time, or any number of things. When we do that, though, we necessarily leave out a lot of information, because otherwise we'd be completely overwhelmed with stimulus. If we were to really, I think, to speak of Arthur, the film Excalibur is one of my, I don't know, it might be like in my top 3 of all time, at least my top 10. Excalibur, the 80s version. Merlin says, "Behold the dragon." And that is absolutely the heart of my experience, where he says, "Listen, Arthur, if you were to behold the dragon all at once, in a single glance, it would burn you to cinders. So dream, rest in the arms of the dragon." And I have chills thinking about that, where this truth, with a capital T, that's before us, this experience, again, whether a person is spiritual or not, I think all of this is just an absolute truth, that it is so intricate and so multivariately glimmering and so terrifying and so awful and so awesome that it's very difficult to begin processing the anything like the full details of it. But I also think it's worthy to try to ask the question, whom does the Grail serve? And in pursuit of that, I've tried to see if I can see better, if I can hear better. And by that I mean, can I allow what's really happening to pass through perception, as opposed to filtering it completely before it reaches whoever the me in the middle of it all is. So you got your left brain.
Just taking it in.
So true. Well said, Jeffrey. Yes, just taking it in. And in pursuit of that, I've started to do a cold plunge that you and I have talked about off the air. And so resetting dopamine and serotonin. And I do a lot of reciting of poetry, of Wordsworth's Lines Written Above Tintern Abbey. So when I do cold plunge, I recite that poem, and I try very hard to, probably my husband Jeff would say, let my third eye cross. And I'm not trying to sound too metaphysical here. I think anybody can do this, whether they believe in the metaphysical or not, by the way, to hear and to see and to feel. And I took a walk after one of my cold plunges about 2 months ago. And I thought, okay, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, let me give this a try. Let me see if I can hear what's already there. Let me see if I can see what's already there. And I was walking up a hill, and I started getting chills and chills and chills. And it wasn't cold chills from the cold plunge. It was just like this, like you get when you're listening to music and something really cool happens in the song unexpectedly, and it gives you those chills. You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so I was walking up the hill, and it was towards golden hour, and I could see the sun shining on the top of some trees, and I was walking towards those, and I thought, wow, that's so beautiful. Those leaves look amazing. There are no substances involved in the telling of this story. So I get to the top of the hill, and I see this, I think it's probably a poplar tree. And instead of the sun being on the tree, as you'd expect it to be sort of glimmering off of the leaves, I saw the sun inside of the tree. And the light was coming out of it, and it was just this molten white diaphanous gold. And I was captivated. I thought, wow, this is here all the time. If I could just look at it this way, this is how it is. And I just I stood there and I breathed and I listened to the sound of the world, and I heard the sound of the leaves, and the leaves were like a song, and you could hear it's like snow falling, like paper rustling,
Melody
like
of
whispering.
nature.
Yeah. And the whispering started to create a pattern. And I thought, oh, the tree is like the center of an eye. And if I pull out, maybe I'd see the whole eye, and it would be huge and small at the same time. And I heard a voice, and the voice said, I am with you. So that would be my story of something metaphysical or other happening to me.
What do you think that was, that voice? Or who it was?
I wrote it in my journal this way, and so I'll leave it open. I think it was the voice of my father. It could have been with a capital F or a lowercase f or both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it was beautiful, and it lingered with me, till this moment. And that's not a story that I've told publicly yet, but I'm very grateful for it. And I think the cool thing about it is that it isn't unusual, that is actually something that just can happen, that it doesn't have to be rare, that it's accessible to anyone.
It sounds like a gift, in the sense of you were walking after your cold plunge and you realize to yourself that it's a good thing to just let it in, to be open and to not have a filter through which you perceive the world. And what you saw was, during the golden hour, this sun going through that tree with the God rays scattering all across the horizon. And that was the moment that you had that experience at the same time, which sounds to me like a snapshot in time that couldn't have been a second later or a second earlier, where you had that experience, which you believe was your father giving you a very important message.
Wow. That's beautifully said, Jeffrey.
I love that way of approaching life. It goes back to what we were discussing like maybe 40 minutes ago about, opening that door to Narnia, or reopening it if it was closed before, allowing the magical, allowing the surprising, allowing the beautiful back in to enjoy life and see what's happening around you. Maybe that realization, although I wanted to say maybe that realization brought you to this, but it sounds to me like you were already quite open for a long time, and I don't think you've ever closed the door to Narnia. But anyway, just some random thoughts out loud, but yeah.
Random. Just some random
thoughts,
casual, amazing poetic thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I love that. Beautiful.
Thank you.
All right.
You want to know something cool?
Bring it on.
Well, there's the opening of the album. The music album is a story. It's a concept album. So there are 10 songs, and every song is a movement. And so there's a song on the album which its main title is Snow. And so that's touched on our conversation in a direct way. But what you have just said relates in that sort of deep way, which is the subtitle of the song is called The Gift. And so the concept of this piece is to come through the maelstrom and to find meaning for it, to sublimate, to transmute it, and to find the gift inside of the storm. So Wow. Thank you for saying that.
Synchronicity at work, right here.
Right here. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's make the jump to your upcoming album, and also the couple of songs that you already brought out. Starting, I believe, from 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Can you walk me through that? Can you walk me through? Or actually, maybe let me phrase it this way. I believe the movie came out in 2011, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Before you started getting engaged in music, or were you already engaged in music back then? How did you make the jump to that to music?
Oh, lovely. Yeah. So it was a very natural progression because with video games before the film, I was doing the score work for that. So I was very much involved with making music for the video games, and then music for the films was part of it. I had some great people I worked with on the soundtrack. Burning Bridget Cleary and House of Hamler, an amazing Celtic band. Anybody should look up. They're incredible. And Vance Gilbert is this wonderful folk musician. So they were very inspiring to work with, and it was all moving for me to be a part of creating the score and the soundtrack and all that. My hands are all over that part. And so moving towards music was already kind of happening. I just didn't I don't tend to put myself in front of those projects. The music now sort of puts me in the spotlight, but in the past I was more like secretly, doing my thing behind the camera, but I was doing it. I was doing it incognito mode.
Right.
Yeah. So I loved that. And now that you say it, a really cool way of connecting the music with the present is, I talked with Chris DeCesare. This was before I really got to know Jeff a ton. Like, I talked with him on the phone, and he did the narration for the film, so I was getting to know him as a colleague. But I actually got to know Chris a lot more first. And I was asking him, well, what do you think of John Jeff Ongar? What do you know about him? What can I understand so that we can portray him with the greatest authenticity? By the way, the actors did a super great job. Aaron Catter as Jeff and Kyle Shea as Chris. They did phenomenal. Again, I digress. So I was asking Chris about Jeff's character, and he said, well, if you want to know about Jeff, I'll tell you two things. You should read the book Pride and Prejudice and pay attention to the character Lord Darcy, or Darcy as he would be referred, because that's just Jeff in a nutshell. And you should listen to the song I Melt With You by Modern English. And so for anybody who doesn't know the song, you probably have heard it. It's like, I'll stop the world and melt with you. You've seen the difference and it's getting better all the time. Like that. And so I listened to that song, great 80s song, and it was just like, wow, that's an awesome song. I already loved that song. And if Jeff is this in a nutshell, I'm going to like this guy. Leap forward to a few years ago. I am, married with Jeff, and he tells me, hey, did you know the band Modern English is getting the original members back together for the first time? This was, I think, 2016. And they are putting out a whole new album. And I think it's going to be amazing. What do you think, since you know about music and you've been working on all these projects all along, do you think that you could, offer them anything? And if so, would they ever maybe work with you on your stuff? And so they were, conducting a Patreon. And so there were some fun ways of getting in touch with them at the time. And so reached out to them and told them the story. And they actually said that they would be featured on my entire debut album. And so having heard their song when making the film, which sort of led me to meeting Jeff, and then Jeff told me about their album, and that led me back to them. And so now I am working with these people that I've looked up to forever that are just geniuses, and now my friends, and they're featured on my album. So it's a kind of it's unbelievably surreal and a dream come true. So in the process of making the album, it's been a long-term project. I wanted to see what I could put out of my own stuff to sort of establish my name, because heretofore I've really been, like I said, sort of behind the camera, behind the scenes, and it would have been a surprise if I just put out this album. It's like, here's my films, but now here's my album. So leading up to that, I ended up releasing an original single so that people would understand, okay, Mara as a musician and Mara as creating these music videos. And so I wrote the song Midnight Mind in 2020, which I think is what you're referring to. And that song is my cat is, I would never let my cat in the room when I'm interviewing, but he just had surgery. So please forgive him for meowing. I'm just going to toss him out.
That's
We'll
perfectly fine.
In less than 8 seconds. Chance, are you talking to everybody? You can't be talking to everybody. Okay, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
He's a good boy, I promise. He's finally recovering. But at any rate, the song is a really, really personal piece, and I've loved that you have found any value in it. You mentioned that you've listened to it a little bit. It's the idea that really relates to our interview a ton, which is the idea of frames of reference and how we can reach out to each other and sort of touch hands from these different perspectives. And in fact, the song explores the idea that there's winds of change, and the winds move the clouds across the sky. And so what do we make of that when it happens, when the torrential winds rip us apart and bring the clouds and cover up the sky? But those same winds push the clouds away and reveal the stars, and they bring the breeze and the music. And so the refrain of the song is the idea of giving a name to the wind. How do we create meaning out of this tumult, this life-giving breath, this entity? And in the song, I love that I'm able to explore through my husband, John Jeff Ungar. He does the German lyrics, which are, forgive my German accent is terrible, but der Wind heißt Seligkeit, du gibst mir Seligkeit. Der Wind heißt Seligkeit, ich bin nicht mehr allein. And so the wind is Seligkeit, which is this idea that it's like the wind is salvation or bliss. We're giving a name to the wind, and you bring me bliss and salvation, and you give me a name. So again, we return to the idea of unity and trust with someone else. And indeed, someone else can even be another side of ourselves that we make peace with. And I think to some degree that's why I entitled it Midnight Mind, which is to say, when you're in the depths of that kind of darkness, when an existential heaviness hits you, where do you look, and can you find the light? And so I created that song, and I worked with Real World Studios, which was another life-changingly dream-come-true moment, because my hero, Peter Gabriel, owns Real World Studios, and he sang the song In Your Eyes that everybody loves from the 80s, from that movie where he holds the stereo above his head and all that. And working with them was brilliant. They were so kind and supportive, and we created I directed a music video that won some awards that I'm very, very humbled by, putting them in those festivals and getting ready for the album. So that was Midnight Mind, sort of created in the meantime while we get prepared for the Modern English album, Modern M, that's coming out later in the year.
About Midnight Mind, one of I see a parallel between the song and how you're describing it, and that experience when you were 2.5 years old and you were looking into the sky when you were dressed in your midnight gown. When creating that song, Did you have that experience in mind?
Let me think about that for a second. I love that question. There's no doubt. Yeah, there's no doubt. I think that's right. That I was, yeah, it's like maybe I started writing the song back then. I think that's a really cool way of thinking about that, of looking at the snow, because I could have been freaked out by it, right? I could have said, like, this is gross, I want to go back to California.
Right.
But giving a name to that moment and seeing our stars, how they shine bright within your midnight mind, and falling in love with the world over and over again. Yeah, I think that's right, Jeffrey. I love that.
Well, it also speaks words about your imagination and about your experience that you've had, and about the way that you allow experiences to come in, and all the experience that we just discussed are a part of that. So maybe, am I understanding correctly that is the midnight mind, the mind that allows imagination to come in and to be explored?
So I'm fist pumping right now. Not that you can see that.
I can't. Okay.
I love that. I really, really love that. Like the vault of heaven, this slate on which the magic can be writ. I think that's amazing. I love that. And it reminds me too, in one of the interviews you had with Donna Brendel. Is that, I'm bad at pronunciations.
Yeah, Brendel. Yeah,
Brendel.
Donna.
She
lovely
had this
lady to talk to.
Oh, she's wonderful. And she talked about, she's talking about autism, but this idea of mirroring. It's an act of kindness that you can look into someone else and say, okay, I'm going to mirror you and let you in so that we can have this dialogue. I don't know. That sounds like alchemy to me. It's beautiful.
No, it's a gift to people, generally speaking. You can use it very practical, because mirroring in a practical sense just means I'm repeating a couple of words that you said with either a downwards, what's the word? Afflection or deflection? I think
inflection.
Of inflection, yeah. So either a downwards inflection or an upwards inflection. One comes over as a statement, the other one is being interpreted as a question. And that allows the other person to say more about it, or to take something as a statement. Which is a very, very good technique to keep conversations going, or to let people, or allow people to feel the space to keep on talking. It's a negotiation technique. It's a technique that you can use with your boss, for example, when you're negotiating for a salary or for something else. It's also something that people who are not very social or very good in conversations to move conversations forward in quite a natural way, because, how hard is it to just repeat a couple of words? So, and on top of that, it's also a gift. So if you, generally speaking, people, I think, don't understand what they're thinking, not necessarily onto a very deep level. So there's a couple of ways that you can start understanding something, whatever that something may be. You have to do real thinking, and real thinking doesn't mean the first idea that comes into your mind, you say that. That's not thinking. That's projecting random things that come forward into your mind. Thinking requires you to walk through an idea or a thought and to make sure that it sticks. So one way to do that is by writing it down. Because by writing something, you are being forced into a position where you have to organize what you are thinking. And while you are organizing, you will figure out if your thought can be placed in, can be organized at all or not. And if it's not the case, then generally speaking, the only logical conclusion that can come out of that is that, the thought is flawed in some shape or form. Another way is what you and I are doing right now, talking. Because if you are saying something, you're thinking out loud or like what I'm doing right now, right? I'm laying out an idea right now for a couple of minutes. This allows me to select the words that I'm gonna use, because right now I don't have to think for myself anymore. Right now I have to explain an idea to you, which means that, you know, I have to organize it in such a way, because if I just randomly give you all my thoughts with, you know, completely arbitrarily, you will not be able to understand anything of it. So this forces me to organize my thoughts. But at the same time, you can provide me a gift by summarizing what I said, and pretty much on a silver platter give it back to me like, hey, this is the message that you just gave. And this is pretty much the essence of everything that you've just given me, which is amazing. And it doesn't just help the person who's receiving that gift to understand their thought. It also is a huge sign of trust, because the moment you can do that with someone, the moment you can provide that gift to someone, you are really listening. You are really taking the time for that person, which is, well, that is one of the, in my personal opinion, feeling heard and being able to talk to someone who is truly listening. And this is also one of the questions that I asked in the community a little while ago, like, how many of you have actually experienced in your lifetimes somebody who actually listened to you? I believe that is really important.
Oh, I see. What we're talking about is that sort of fractal reality, and I feel, and you could tell me whether you think this feels true to you, that might be everything. I think that giving, and then also giving in return, that laying out of the thought and the word, and then that acknowledgement and return is equally necessary to both the speaker and the listener, who are also both speakers and listeners simultaneously. Right. And so you have everything, just everything is anything good anyway. I think that's requisite.
Yeah. It's where real thinking happens, and it's where real connections are being made, and it's how people bond to each other. And I believe this is also one of the things that can initiate real friendship between people.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a better way than this, to be honest.
I think that's right. And how rare great friendships are, and how grateful I am to have you as a friend. And thank you for listening to me and for talking to me both. How wonderful. That's awesome.
Yeah, that goes both ways, Mara. I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, I mean it. Thanks.
All right. We are. Let's go up to the surface a little bit again.
Okay.
Because I'm really curious still about your music, and let's jump to the album a little bit later. So first the songs. We discussed Modern M, and that, I believe, came out in 2020.
Yeah, Midnight Mind, right?
Sorry, Midnight Mind. Yeah. And the next one, I believe, is called, and once again, this has something to do with the dark sky, The Dark Night of the Soul. That's the second one.
That's right.
What is that one all about?
Oh, that's such a cool song. So a very brief story for those who are already a fan of the world music artist / Celtic music artist from Canada, Lorena McKenna. She wrote that song as a dedication to St. John of the Cross. And so she took St. John's words and sort of adapted it into a Platonic romance, in a sense. And the idea of either meeting with your soulmate, or meeting with the divine, or meeting with goodness in the dark of night, and you have this dark night of the soul. It's a song that I have loved my entire life, and when I created it, I worked actually with that band I was talking about, House of Hamel, who are they provided the strings and the guitars. They're just world class. Rose Baldino and Brian Buchanan are amazing musicians. So I helped direct their arrangement, and they just did their brilliant thing with it. And I put my vocals on there, such as they are, and just inspired by the initial creation and humbled by the process. And I'll talk to you about the meaning behind the song. But before I do, I can say when I finished creating it, I reached out to Lorena McKennett and her representation to ask for permission. You don't have to do that in the music industry. It's such a weird industry. I can't believe you don't have to ask for permission to make covers of songs, but you don't. But I just like to do it just to be kind to the artists. Like, they put the work into it. It's certainly not something I take for granted that I'm allowed to do a cover. And they thanked me.
Lorena is the original singer.
That's exactly right. Lorena McKennett.
Okay.
So reached out to her. She's epic. She's a big deal for the last, I don't know, she's been doing stuff since the 80s for sure, and her work is featured in so many films, and I think she's part of the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. She's an archetype. She's a heroine. And she and her management, Quinlan Road, actually responded to me to say they love my version and give it their blessing. And yeah, so I never thought in a million that they would respond to me. You know what I mean?
How did it make you feel when you got that response to it? That must have been amazing.
I'm sure I was just like mouth open and eyes watering. Like, how is this even possibly happening? You know, like I said, that it was just a courtesy email. I never thought in a million they would respond. So it was, you know, I guess it's like if it gets 100 listens or 1,000,000 listens, certainly that moment is like, okay, I was able to make my hero smile. That was pretty incredible. Yeah. But the meaning behind the song is just amazing with regard to going through the sort of mansion of your own soul and existence, and going through the different stairways and corridors of comfort, but also darkness, and then emerging into the natural world to communicate and to commune with either, you know, your soulmate in a romantic sense, or with the divine in a metaphysical sense, or just nature for somebody who's more of an atheist, to come together as greater than the sum of your parts, and to witness the love among the lilies fair. It's a beautiful song, and I'm very gratified that people have found, I think, a lot of enjoyment out of it. I take no credit, but I'm honored that people enjoy it. I loved making it.
Yeah, the songs have quite, and once again, I'll put them in the description, so that's where you can find them.
Oh, and I should say that one was produced by a great producer, Clyde Rose and Krantz of Republic Audio Studios. So if people want a wonderful producer who's amazingly intuitive to work with and just knows what to do, I've worked with Abbey Road, and musicians will know what I'm talking about when I say Abbey Road. I've worked with Real World, and I've worked with Clyde, and Clyde is world class. So, you know, shout out to him as well.
And maybe, okay, I don't know a lot about the production process behind music, so I'm going to ask you a very stupid question here.
No stupid questions. Go for it.
These production studios, right? What do they provide you? Do they provide you the instruments? Pretty much, do you record before? Do you record the lyrics and the instruments before you go there? Do they just put everything together, or do you do everything over there? What do they provide? What do they do pretty much for you?
That's a great question, and it's a fun one to answer. The best answer is they provide you what you're willing to pay for. And so in my case, I'm an autodidact. As I mentioned before, like I know how to produce my own music. I know how to lay down the instruments and the tracks and things. So when a person like me who reaches out to a producer is really just looking for somebody to put a little icing on it. And what that means is the whole song is complete. You've done what's called mixing, so you find the levels for the guitars and the drums, and you figured out how to pan it from the left to the right ear and do your fun tricks and all that. All that's in the bag. All that's in the can already. And then you go to the producer and say, I want you to master this for streaming, or I want you to master this for vinyl. And so they find what's called EQ and compression that works to get the song sounding what people might refer to as loud. So like if you're listening to the radio or like a mix on Spotify or something like that, you might notice sometimes like there's a loud song and then a softer song, and then you have to like pump the volume up. And there's something called the loudness wars, which have been going on for about 2 decades. And so people like producers in the 90s and 2000s started making songs super loud and what's called compressed, which is a garbage sound. Like no one really likes compressed music, but it's loud. And because it's loud, it grabs attention. And so there's also that whole thing about is like legally commercials are supposed to make their sound less loud, so it's not like louder than the TV show, because it annoys people. It's like, oh, it's too loud.
It's anyway. Like the advertisement during the commercial break that are louder than the movie that you're watching. Exactly.
So if that's ever bothered you, that's what compression sounds like.
Really annoying, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so certain producers working on like R&B and pop and you know, they're not really thinking about the fidelity of the audio. They're not really thinking about making an epic masterpiece. They pump compression and they get it really loud so that it's competitive on Spotify or the radio and things like that. And if it makes the other songs sound softer, the human ear and brain sort of works that we just like the thing that we can hear better. And so it's sort of a cheat. You remember that,
you're right.
Exactly. And so a really good producer these days will find a way of keeping what's called the dynamics in a song. So if you think about like a visual and you think of white on a painting and you think about black on a painting, that's like the ultimate dynamic. So it's like all the way up to white and all the way down to black. And if we think about music, we might think really loud as being white and really like quiet, silent being black. And so when you have like score work or something like that, you're super dynamic where it's like you have super quiet moments and then you have really loud moments when like a big crescendo comes in and things in the middle. But with pop and R&B, you don't have a lot of dynamics. It's just like boom, 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 boom. It's very even. So a good producer will find a balance of making it loud without being compressed and keeping the dynamics. So in a nutshell, that's what I would use a producer for. But someone else might use a producer. Okay, I don't want to shame anybody. Let's just say a Jane or John Doe who's very popular might walk into a popular production house today with like a crew of 35 people and they say, I have 3 lyrics. And they say, what do you want to do with that, producer? And the producer will write the song. They'll play the guitar. They'll hire out additional musicians. They'll create the hook. So, you know, a producer could be the next member of the band secretly, where it's like they're the one actually making the music. It can go that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Or a producer could just put a little fairy dust on it right at the end. I'm more of my producer puts the fairy dust on the end. I want to have my hands on the production, but you know, to each their own.
Yeah, and it might not even be a knowledge thing, because you clearly have the knowledge to do a lot of it yourself. It might also just be a time thing. If it's like a very big artist or whatever, they might not have the time to make sure that everything is done themselves.
Let's say with Adele, like she's a virtuosic singer. She needs to concentrate on her brilliant vocal, and other people can kind of do the rest. So absolutely, there's all kinds of right ways of doing it.
There's so in the project management world, there is a triangle that you can play around with during a project, and this, what you're saying, is pretty much a project.
Yes.
The first one is budget, the second one is scope, and the third one is time. So these are the things you can play with. So if you don't have time, but you have a lot of budget, go to production studios so they can do everything for you and you don't have to worry about a thing. It just depends on where within the triangle, where the right balance is for you, pretty much.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. So the only reason you went there was for the finishing touches, just as a sanity check. Everything is okay. Everything is balanced. Everything is beautiful. It's ready to go.
Oh, so true. Yeah, I mean, it's and it's kind of fun to be like, this was produced by Abbey Road Studios. So there's a little bit of name recognition there that I think is a bonus to attach their esteem onto the project, especially if they approve of it and are enthusiastic about it. It's nice to have that team feel as a bonus.
Well, we did the first two. We might as well do the third one. And we already discussed it a little bit off the air regarding the interpretation of it. But walk me through the third one, Cities in Dust.
Oh yeah, Cities in Dust I did pretty recently, and so the original song is by Susie and the Banshees, and fans of Susie and the Banshees will know exactly what I'm talking about. If folks don't know who they are a seminal forging artist in the sort of post-punk, new wave type of feel of music from the 80s. Susie Sue is she's just a nuts amazing performer, and I don't know, if somebody likes The Cure, they might think of her as sort of like a female version of that, but she's her own thing entirely. And I'm a big fan, needless to say. But the song I loved because it looks into this idea of sort of a Pompeii situation where a volcano has sort of frozen a city in time through this tragic event of the eruption. And the idea that there are then these sort of statues, in a sense, left behind with these clay pots. And, again, this is sort of a darker subject matter for anybody who's sensitive to that. But people who might have been left gasping for air and agape in the wake of this, finding their remains, it's a very dark thing to think about. And yet I really love the idea that we humans would use these careful hands, these delicate movements to wipe away the ashes of the tragedy and to try to learn about who they are, what were they doing, what had they achieved, what were their dreams, what was their technology, and to know that even though maybe they thought in their final moments, this is it, this is what it comes to, that it wasn't it, and they have legacy and they continue to move us, really, really inspires me. And as you pointed out, the song also has certainly echoes of the carnage and fallout of war, and how we look at the people who are involved by choice and those who are involved against their will. And also, again, reaching to the fractal nature, how we experience that, everybody day to day have the war of living. Living is a gift, but that does not mean it's easy. It's a decision every single day that every person doesn't realize they're making, is to stay alive. And I would really, really urge anybody who hears this, who thinks I'm not doing enough or I'm not existing, it's like, if you're alive, you chose that. You're alive. That's a big choice. That's the to be or not to be. You chose to be. In the primary binary, you chose something brave, and I think that's it's, again, that's one of those things. It's everything, choosing to actually be. And so when I made that song, I considered the temporal nature of it, where it's like you have eternity, but you also have these sort of fleeting moments. And I really, really don't enjoy AI being involved with it. I'm just going to hot take. I'm not for AI in music. So early on I decided, no, I'm not using auto tune. I'm not using pitch correct. I'm going to put my hands on the keyboard. I'm going to put my hands on the guitar. And if I make a weird note or I have a frog in my throat, I'm leaving that in there because my humanity is what I can offer. And so the instrumentation is things like the crackling of real autumn leaves or scraping through dirt, and this sort of really cool ancient clay pot I had access to that I made a good resonance with. And as well as that, I heard from a hero of mine vocally that mentioned if you cry while you're singing, it can be difficult to sing, but it opens up your throat and allows your vocal cords to move in a way that kind of reflects back to infancy, and that it has this really honest effect. So, I let that emotion come through in that song, which is a little bit scary, but as I mentioned before, it's definitely I don't mean that to say like it's a good vocal, but what I can say is it's an honest vocal, and I wanted to give that vulnerability if I could.
Yeah. I listened to it very closely. So the best way for me personally to listen to music and get the highest possible quality with the equipment that I have is with AirPods Pro, and then
Nice.
if possible enable the Dolby Atmos. I'm not sure if it was I think Cities in Dust had that available. Not sure, but regardless, that's the best way for me to listen to it. I didn't pick up the emotion that you just described, so it's very well, at least from my experience, it's very nuanced. Then if you want to, and I'm not sure if you even want to, but I will definitely check it again. Do you know where in the song that comes forward?
Well, so you're trying to detect where it sounds like I'm crying, is that right?
Right, that extra emotion, because I'm very curious about the specific sound that you're describing.
Yeah. Well, I'd kind of say it's all over it, and so
Right. Okay.
I don't think you'll find it in the sense of me, making traditional like sniffling sounds or anything like that. But the feel of it and the way that it opens up the vocal has a particular effect. So the truth
Right.
of the
Okay.
matter is, whatever you're receiving is correct in that sense. So whatever way you're hearing it, that's how it honestly is. And I would say that you're dead on with wherever you are with it.
Right. So right. Okay. But it definitely gives the song a unique sound compared to, for example, Midnight Mind. Then,
Yeah, yes. So
which it
Midnight
definitely
Mind
does
is
because
much
it
more
sounds
joyful.
completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and like you said, I also love how. So you described as the primary inspiration of being kind of like a Pompeii event. My original interpretation was, like you said already, completely different, and I also love how this song in particular is not super specific, so it doesn't exactly say what it is about. So what I had in mind when I was listening to it is I had in mind that that a conqueror or any person that is engaged in conquering other territories was being needed to flee because he was being defeated, and he fled to another place, and he got found, and he got captured. Um, um, but then in his wake, because of the decisions that he made, the cities that were either his or the cities that he conquered previously when he was in power were burned and turned to dust.
Right.
So the message that I picked up, and the lesson I would lift out of that interpretation is also something like, be aware of who you decide to follow, because the person that you are following might lead you to cities in dust.
Mm-hmm. Excellent interpretation.
Something like that.
Yeah. Yep. I feel that. And I really think there are shades of that in what I was imagining when I was creating it. I think that's really, really excellent.
Before we move to the album, one last question. When creating these songs, what is your underlying creative process that you follow? How do you start from generating your first tune or your first lyric? How do you work practically?
How do I work practically? That's interesting. I think that it's really important. This is going to sound boring to some and exciting to others. So this is, again, they're very, probably mostly, I have a nerdy personality, but there are definitely parts of myself that are. And one of the things I really like is taxonomy and folder organization on my computer. And I think that anybody who doesn't get organized first, just please think about organizing yourself first, because you're going to have a good idea, you're going to get something out, and you're going to have nowhere to go with it because it has no name, it has no folder, it has weird file types. Just, I think the best thing that I do for myself when I get started is I think, okay, what is the name of this project? What's my main folder and my subfolder? Let me get what I call my readmes going. And so I think it's super important. You know, people have their own way of working, but I'd recommend strongly opening up like a plain text document. This is something I used to do when I was doing the AI programming. You create a README that tells the other coders what you did. It's like, here's what I was doing, here's what I meant to do. If you change my code, here's where you go from there. So I just sort of took that on from my old fun coding time. Anyway, so I create a little text document and I say, well, here's what I think it's called right now. And it's not set in stone. So I don't hold myself to the initial title. Sometimes the initial title holds and sometimes I definitely change it. So just, placeholder. With the date, always start with the date first. So it's like the year first, so today would be 2024, blah, blah, blah. Or if this airs in 2025, blah, blah, blah. And so that everything gets organized by date chronologically so that you know where to go back and you make a note. Here's what I'm creating. Here's how I feel about it. Here's, what microphone I'm using. Here's what user interface I'm using. Like all this sort of boring but fun detail. Get that in there. And then your brain can let go and you can relax and say, okay, whatever I create, I have a place for it. I can back up my hard drive. I'm good to go. You're comfortable. Your room's clean. I think it's important to have a clean room. It's crazy to try to make music in like a garbage mess. So I, practically speaking, definitely brush my teeth, clean my room, get my folders organized. That makes me feel so much better when I start a project.
You'll be a great project manager.
Well, that's nice coming from you.
It's a good start. No, you and I are exactly the same way. And one of the reasons why I'm asking is because I'm personally myself, I'm very interested in writing. So I've done a couple of I'm not sure if it's really serious, but I tried a couple of times to do some creative writing.
Nice.
And one of the things I did to prepare for that was read a book by Stephen King, How to Live and How to Write. Or it was called On Living and On Writing, I believe, if I remember correctly. He is completely different than you and I. Because if you and I would write a story, what we will very likely do is create an outline first. So we would create an outline. Generally speaking, we will think of the subject, what we want to talk about, and let's just say, as an example, we want to talk about our lives. Okay, it's gonna be an autobiography then. Fine. What are the big events in our lives? Which symbolize then the chapters. So it might be what happened in your childhood. It might be the move from California to New York. It might be creating your first song. It might be the paranormal event that you all those sorts of things. You put them in line, and then you decide, okay, now I know what the subjects are going to be. What do I want to tell? And those are pretty much, in project management terms, those will be your deliverables, the items that you want to create, that you want to write about. And then you double check if everything is organized, chronologically correct, and if you have that, then you have pretty much a spine through the story that you can follow and that you can flesh out. That's probably how you and I would approach this.
I'm going to interject for like 8 seconds and just say, exactly. That's exactly
Right.
what I loves me an outline, but please go on.
It's really interesting because you are also at the same time a very creative and imaginative person, and those kind of people, I think, generally speaking, tend to follow more the intuition route. So before we go to that route, because I'm curious where you stand on this. Before we go there, what I read from Stephen King is that he's completely different. He doesn't create an outline up front. What he is doing, so the comparison that he made was with a archaeologist brushing down the skeleton of a dinosaur. That's literally the example that he used. So the logic is, you don't know how the dinosaur is going to look in the end. You don't know what you have. All you have is a small bone or teeth or something like that. And you keep on brushing and you keep on prodding and you keep discovering more and more and blowing the sand away, until there's a whole skeleton over there. And that's when your book is done. So he doesn't know where he's going to. He just knows, okay, this is the starting point. We're going to take it from here. So while he is imagining the story, he's writing it down at the same time. He is technically the first reader of his own story, which is the complete opposite of how you and I would approach that. And me, as from a temperament, from a personality, I'm not a very creative person. So not in the sense of visually creative. I'm a bad drawer, for example. I don't even want to sing. I'm a terrible singer. I sing under the shower, and that should stay where it may. That's it. But I'm not a very creative person in the classical sense. But I am very organized. So that's why I would go the outline route. You are very creative. You are very imaginative. You can get captured by experiences, like that tree that you saw in the distance with the sun going through it. That's very, very imaginative. Yet you still lean towards the practical is not the word. Towards the more organized way of putting your more organized way of following your creative process, which is incredibly interesting because you are creative, and very organized at the same time. Why do you think that is? Long question. I hope it makes sense.
Oh, it made great sense. Super interesting. Not me, I'm not interesting, but what you say is interesting for sure. It's so cool to think about Stephen King's process, and I think it's good to try to understand each other. So I can't say that I relate to his style directly. By style, I mean his approach to how he starts creating his stories. Although I like his books very much. So that's so interesting, and it reminds me a little bit of my husband's process. And he would not he would not enjoy if I said, let's make an outline, let's make a schedule. Like he would be like, I don't want to do that. Let me just come around to it in my own way, And he's brilliant, so that's a wonderful way of doing it, of course. But it's not my way of doing it. The question is why, and know thyself. That is a tough thing. And so, how am I, to some degree, intuitive and creative, to whatever degree I am, and how am I, to some degree, efficient, pragmatic, and organized? I think that one of the things I observed when I was younger is that a lot of people like to be creative, and it's fun to be creative. And it's intuitive, and it's relaxed, and it's improvisational, and there's no wrong movements in improv and all that. However, if everyone is like that, there's no story and nothing gets done. And somebody needs to create a structure in which the story can exist, or else there is no story and it's just incomprehensible and there's no timeline. And I felt like I needed to make sure things happened and had appropriate frames and boundaries so that people could see the art and digest the art and experience it. So it's fun. I like being creative and intuitive and expressive, but I don't want to say it's useless outside of organization, but it could be without that. Like, you have to have somebody in your team, or you need yourself to be that person who says, yes, this is creative. Yes, I think Dr. Ian McGilchrist might have even said something like, if he was left to his own devices, he'd still be working on his first book, as an example.
Right.
And I think I fear that. I fear not finishing. I fear not putting the polish on. I remember when I used to try to sew to make clothes, and I told myself, you have to put a hem on the bottom because it's not finished until you put the hem on the bottom. Put the hem on the bottom and then you can move on. So I think what you're talking about with regard to like mirroring and trying to give the gift of correspondence back and forth plays at the core of me to some degree with regard to creativity, that I don't just get to experience it, that I find a way to share it with people so that they receive it in a way that they might possibly find value in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does. It sounds like a very good combination to have. You are at the same time you are able to do the part of the creation itself, but at the same time you are not stuck in the zone that usually a creative person might be stuck in, which is perfectionism, which is not moving forward, which is self-doubting, things like that.
Well,
So creating
what a great
while
way
moving
to think
forward.
about that, because that's a real fear, right? Like self-doubt, I mean, that plays in people hugely, and it plays in me. And I'm fascinated by what you're saying, because maybe to some degree it's a tool, like a weapon against that says, well, if self-doubt creeps around the corner, but this is too important for me to not put out, you have to have something that's more important than the doubt. And sometimes a deadline and organization, they can be that sort of pragmatic item that lets you say, yeah, there could be a lot of ideas here, there could be self-doubt, but this other thing is more worth it and it's more tangible, so I can move forward, and not be stagnated. Wow, I like that, Jeffrey.
Yeah. From a practical standpoint, while running a project, for example, if you want to, because the question, the asking yourself the question, is it good enough to release right now, is a very legitimate question. And
Yes.
if you are the only person that is able to answer that question, because you are, making a painting just for yourself, or you're singing a song just for yourself, and there's nobody around you that can tell you, hey, Mara, this is good enough. You're ready to release right now.
Right.
It's a very logical thing for people to do, self-doubting, especially because we are hypercritical. Well, I'm not sure if the word hyper is good, but so let's just go with critical for now. But in general, we are critical of our own work and what we do. For example, and you took it away from me quite quickly in the beginning of this conversation, but I've told you offline already. Like, before we start a podcast episode, I'm nervous every single time. There's always this form of self-doubting. Is it good enough? Is it, are you honoring your guests properly? Are you giving them enough space to talk and to explore their ideas? And is the end result, is it even interesting for listeners to begin with? There's a lot of those questions that are coming forward. But at some point, and this is also one of the questions, for example, that I had, and I'm making a jump here, but before moving to Poland to meet my future wife, it's these questions that are like, are you sure that what you're doing right now is the right move? Are you sure there's no other way? You know, those kind of questions. If you are the only person out there that can answer these questions, that is rough. That is really rough. It is.
Yes.
It's a lot easier if you, in a classical project sense, for example, if you have 10 stakeholders that are engaged in the project and you just ask them like, hey, you know, the timeline is next week Friday. This is what we have right now. This is what we still have to do. You tell me, is it good enough to launch, or do you want to give more budget or more time or something like, or less scope or something like that? You know, because then you are not the person that has to make the decision. Making decisions, that's the hard part.
Man, I agree with that. Speaks to me so much.
All right. Let's move on to Modern M.
Okay,
It has
sounds
been
good.
it has been 2.5 hours in the making, but let's move on to that, because you have been a long time fan of Modern English, the old band, old school band, I should say, and you've
Yeah.
collaborated with them on Modern M. How have they influenced the creative process, and how did you balance their sound, your sound, and your own artistic vision?
Wow, that's awesome. That's a fantastic question. Holy moly. I think that working with them has pushed me massively. And by that I mean, you were just talking about this idea of being inside the vacuum of your own mind and making those decisions, of being nervous before the show. And I think when I'm not using this in a big five sense, but you're a really conscientious person, and in the broad sense, you are thinking of other people, and you're thinking, you know, is the audio good? Are these questions good? How will my guest feel? How will the audience perceive this? That's very generous to think about that. And yet, all you can do up front is imagine how they will feel, and the abyss of possibility can be overwhelming with regard to imagining how people will perceive something, and to some degree you only have yourself to toss the idea back and forth with. That's negative in some sense, because you just have this infinity of possibility, and you're trying to control for the outcomes and make sure it has a positive effect. On the positive side of it, you also get to explore your own pursuits and desires, and you're not really contaminated. So, you know, as strengths and weaknesses, working alone on something, working with somebody else has its own strengths. And one of the things that happened with Modern English was I was subjected to their genius. They're British, and so they probably don't like me talking them up that way. So I'll say they're mad scientist ways. They're so humble, but they really are. Mick Conroy, the bassist, is a genius, and Gary and Robbie and Steve and the drummer I also worked with, Roy Martin, just awesome guys. But when I worked with Mick, especially the bassist, and he's worked on some epic projects. So if you ever look up Michael Conroy, you'll see he's like involved with tons of other brilliant things you wouldn't even know he's on. He's just this incredible mad genius. Anyway, I wrote the songs. So that was in a vacuum. I wrote the songs. So I started out with 5, and this was supposed to be an EP at first, which is to say an extended play, which is sort of a misnomer because it means a shorter record. So if somebody says EP, it's the shorter. LP is the long play. That's the longer record. So it started out
in minutes.
as an EP.
How long is an EP generally in minutes?
I'm going to get this wrong, but I'm going to say something like 20 minutes is the EP, or it could be 40. Somewhere in there. I think it's something like 3 songs. It's like the average of 3 songs to 5 songs is an EP, and then if you go above that, then it's an LP, a full album. So I was sort of at the longer end of an EP when we got started. I sent off 5 original songs, And what I did was we worked in Logic, which is called a digital audio workstation. So if you ever hear people in your project say, like, I'm working on this DAW, D-A-W, they mean the digital audio workstation. And that's the program that you use to make the music. So the Microsoft Word is a program we'd use to create a Word document. Logic is a program we'd use to make music. And so we both happened to use Logic. That was lucky. I also use Adobe Audition, but my main software is Logic on Apple. And he uses Logic on Apple. And I was like, heck yeah. Because when you're sharing files back and forth, you don't want to have to deal with the whole conversion process. It's a nightmare. So
yeah, makes it a lot easier like this.
Oh my gosh. I was wiping sweat off my brow when he said he used Apple.
Right.
So we were good. And so I wrote the songs, and we did what was called sharing stems. So if you think about a song, let's say a really simple song, and I don't mean like the melody is simple, but like the elements. So if you think of Dark Night of the Soul, there are 2 violins, a cello, 2 guitars, a bass line, a main vocal, and several harmony vocals. So that's a pretty simple song. And so, whatever I just named, like 8 stems would create the song. And so then I sent those over to Mick for 5 different songs. So let's say there were 20 stems per song times 5, whatever that works out to. And he received those and plugged them in over in Britain. He was living in England at the time. He actually lives in my hometown now, and I moved away, if that's not
Really?
crazy. Yeah, he lives in New York now, and I live in Pennsylvania, so that's funny how that works. But at the time, he was still in Britain, and so we shared across the sea, and he got the guys together, and everybody put in different elements. But he was the tech wizard, so he knew how to put it all together. They were more just using their wonderful instruments, and they would give that to him, and then he'd consolidate that and send it to me. And so the vocals were always going to be done by me mainly because it would be my album. But I was thinking initially that they would just be doing all the instrumentation and things like that. And so what he sent me back was like wild. It was awesome. And they come from this landscape of, they came in right off of the back of punk, before New Wave. And so it has a lot of real, like, masculine, exciting rock, punk feel to it. Like their roots are with punk as well as post-punk and new wave. So the I Melt With You song is one of their more softer pieces, a little bit more pop oriented. Their usual oeuvre is in that sort of more hard-edged, experimental, but yet still beautiful and soundscapey approach. And so when I received that, I felt like I was just getting this sort of I don't know, it's like a philosopher's stone. You touch it and it changes you. You look into it and it looks into you, and now you are changed. And so when they put their spin on my stuff, I couldn't help but be affected by it. So then there's a conundrum, right? Like, these are my songs that I'm writing, but this is their incredible work. And then comes your wonderful question: how do you find a balance between those two sounds? Because I think, I have a lot of sides to me, but I think a lot of people look at me as being, to some degree, sort of ethereal-oriented, maybe fantasy-oriented, kind of soft or light and bright. That's not the only part of my personality by far.
The Witcher 3.
Right. Yes. So they brought out some of the edge and the experimentation that's already latent for me. And I think that it's kind of, it's right where we started. It's that idea that, like, when we play a video game or we're on stage and you experiment with things that aren't normally yourself, you kind of find out who you really are. And so in hearing some of their experiments, I found out what I really love. And so I was able to take so many different elements of what they were giving me and layer that with what I already had but also allow myself to be changed by that and reform what was going on. And so over the course of a couple years, 5 songs turned now into 10 songs. And so I took what they gave me and sort of remapped it out like a whole new puzzle, like a new mosaic. And I worked live with Mick, who then sort of re-exchanged with me based on what I was giving him, and the other guys too as well, and created something that is so much more than the sum of its parts. And I think it kind of ends up being a narrative of the epochal moments of my life to some degree. It's a very honest album. It's a story album. It's full of concept and hope and their genius and my attempted artistry. I'm so enthralled with the music. I guess I just have to say that I'm humble with regard to my own capabilities. I'm not trying to say I'm awesome, because I don't, that's crazy. But what I can say is the music is awesome. It's so good. I love the album.
It's also really great that they evolved in their role for you, so they didn't just serve the purpose of providing you with the instrumentals, which then could be used in order to create the songs. They effectively became I think partner is the right word here. They gave you not just what you asked for, but they gave you inspiration, which allowed you to double the amount of songs that you created and to tell more stories.
So true. So true. Partners, exactly right. Well said, my friend.
You said at the beginning that that a big part of the album are archetypes. What did you mean by that?
Oh yes. Well, so when I started writing this, and I did write an outline, you won't be surprised. I wanted to tell a story. And I wanted it to tell some specific things. And at the heart of the story is a protagonist. And I want to keep it as general as that. In my mind, she is a protagonist, and to some degree she is me, but she is a protagonist. So she should be, I would hope to the listener, thought of as an archetype. And when I say this, it means that she encompasses things that are universal to each of our experiences. And so her love or her anger or her tragedy or her learning are familiar, I would say, at least I hope they are, to everyone's experience of either themselves or somebody that they hold in a kind of esteem. And so she could be thought of as the Grail, or she could be thought of as yourself, or she could be thought of as your wife or your daughter or your brother. So archetypes. And one of the songs on the album that brings me to my knees, and I take no credit for it. It's like this song just came through me, and the guys did such a great job with what they added to it. Amazing. This is the first time I'm saying it publicly, so depending on when this airs, this may be the first time this title has ever been spoken. But one of my favorites, they're all my favorites, but one of my favorite songs on the albums is called What Archetypes Say. And the idea here is I still want to believe, and we have archetypes in our minds, heroes from mythology, from politics, from entertainment, from books, from our imaginations, that we think are heroes. And they are heroes. But sometimes our heroes don't manifest in the ways that we hope or believed that they would. And it can change our faith in how we view that book character or that religious leader or that politician or that celebrity. But when we lose that faith, if we leave it there and we just say, okay, they disappointed me, the end, I don't like that story. I'm not saying that it's not a real story, but I don't like that story, and I still want to believe what archetypes say. And I think it's important to want people to succeed and not to root for the downfall of things. I want to root for the building of things. And so things are archetypes in that sense. The thing of the library, the thing of the symphony, the thing of love, the thing of the hero, the thing of the saint, of the angel, of the humble helper. These archetypes, they're almost like tarot cards. They're like face cards, you know?
Mm-hmm. Is this something that you consciously put in? Is it something that naturally manifested? How conscious was how conscious was the implementation of archetypes in your creative process of creating the songs?
That's a great question as well. I believe that the it's like what you so brilliantly said and asked when you said, well, when did you start writing Midnight Mind, and did you have the little girl in mind with the nightgown? And I thought to myself, wow, yeah, maybe she was writing that. Maybe she began writing that back then, and I'm just picking up on what she already had in mind. And so I would say the archetype is there for me as well from, the first films that I watched as a little kid, and, like The Last Unicorn or Jurassic Park or what have you. Saturday morning cartoons, I really like Storm from the X-Men so much. Archetypes, they're archetypes. And when you fall in love with a character like Storm or Phoenix from the X-Men, you start seeing them in other places. And you say, oh, but that's like Storm, or that's what Jean Grey would do when you see a certain celebrity that you love, or you see some totally different movie that's like set in a post-apocalyptic future. Those things seem to resurface, and I keep seeing them. And you talk about synchronicities. I think that's part of that, is recognizing those patterns as they come up. So I think maybe longer than I know, maybe before me, I've been thinking about these archetypes in a sense.
What does the album mean for you personally?
Oh, what does it mean? There's going to be a song at the end of the album. It's a song that I actually wrote before everything. Long time ago.
Before Midnight
Before
Night.
the movie. Yeah, when I was like a teenager. And it's a sweet little thing. It's called Mountain Stone, and I used a line. I felt better yesterday. I could see more yesterday. But I can feel better today, someday. And I think that the album means for me a elevation outside of the dimensionality boundaries of temporal reality, and to say, I am what I was, I am what I am now, and I am what I will be. All of these are true, and so are you, and this won't end. That there's an eternity. I think it means that to me, yeah. My husband has a good term for it, actually. He says it better than I do. He calls it music for time travelers.
Music for time travelers.
Yeah.
What do you think is the purpose of music?
Wow. I think music is super important, and I don't mean that because I'm a musician. I think music is not chaos, and I think that is to say, if the world is, then it is something in harmony, and it has something that allows it to be it with definition. And so when we think about my hand as I look at it, my hand isn't my desk. Even though they're made out of basically the same stuff, they look different, they feel different. I can touch the desk. There's a delineation between things. And so there's a kind of harmonic frequency that holds my atoms and my molecules and my everything in place in a way that's recognizably Mara. And then there is a desk, and everything about the desk is harmonically bounded within the desk, even though it could just fall apart. Like, what is making it not do that? It's just like, it's music that's making it not do that. And when things are beautiful, then that harmony is more beautiful, and we can perceive that when we look at something beautiful, like the harmony of a Christmas tree with its lights on. Oh, it's so pretty. Or we look at a rose and say, oh, it's so pretty, like the balance of it, the color, the curl of the petal. It has a harmony to it. And the more beautiful something is, the more harmonized it is. And music is that. And I mean that in a literal sense, where it has the vibrational frequency that allows us to perceive the organization of existence and matter, where when it sounds beautiful and it's music, it's worth it. It's something, as opposed to the entropy that exists outside of definition. I love definition, and I want dynamics, and I want contrast, and I want harmony. And I think that's why music is important, because we experience music on a level that's both deeper and more primordial, and also much higher and much more elevated than we even really have regular cognition of. It reaches us at the beginning and the end, the alpha and the omega. So I think it's really important. What a cool question, Jeffrey.
I try.
Yeah, well, you succeed.
Beautiful answer as well.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. All right. I think we are nearing towards the end. I do have maybe a fun little last one for you. If you could speak to your younger self, what advice would you give young Mara?
Wow. If I could speak to my younger self, what advice would I give young Mara? Oh. All right. I'm seeing her. This is that thing that happens at the singularity where you move so fast that you run up behind yourself. It's like, what would I say to myself? I would tell her, buy Apple stock. No, I'm just kidding.
It's good advice. Not kidding.
I would tell her, listen. And when you hear it. That's what I would say. I would tell her, there's a voice there, and you know which one is the good one. And as much as you're afraid that you're going to get it wrong, when you're pretty sure you've been right about the important stuff. So listen to the voice that seems consistent. It's there. That's not your imagination. I think that would be my advice. What a beautiful question.
Listen to the voice that is consistent.
Yeah, it bears good fruit, you know.
Is that the spirit in you that brings you that's productive, that brings you towards, that makes you you? Is that the consistent voice?
Yeah, I think so. And it sees the good things and the bad things. It's not a naive voice, you know, because sometimes there's wrong ways you can go, and there's things that you want to avoid, and there's things that you want to follow. And so it's like follow your nose. You know what I mean? It'll take in the right direction.
Right. Is it that's the voice that also tells you that you did something wrong if you did something wrong?
Yeah, that's right.
Your conscience.
Well said.
Follow your conscience. Beautiful. Wow. Mara, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Like I told you in the beginning, even though we met 6-7 weeks ago, it feels like I've known you for years. And I think that says a lot. It has been a pleasure talking with you. It has been a pleasure exploring all these different ideas with you, going through your experience from your childhood to the paranormal event, through your creative endeavors in both movies and music. You are an amazing person, and I know for a fact, and this is not just the effect of me, this is also the effect that I notice of others that you are in contact with. You are a really bright light for a lot of people. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So thank you very much for that. And once again, thank you so much for talking with me today.
The feeling is mutual. You honor me. Thank you so much.
Take care of yourself, Mara, and a lot of good luck on wrapping up the album and releasing it. I'm really looking forward to listening to it.
Thank you very much, my friend. Take care of yourself.
Bye. And with that, Mara Katria has left the conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure exploring Mara's incredible journey, from her childhood in the Hudson Valley to her deep dive into filmmaking, music, and beyond. Her experiences, creative processes, and the openness to the magic around her offer so many valuable takeaways, whether you're a creator or simply someone looking to reconnect with your sense of wonder. Before you wrap up, I would like to leave you with one final quote by Mara. I think it was the voice of my father. It could have been with a capital F or a lowercase f, or both. But it was beautiful, and it lingered with me. Thank you for listening, and take care.